In rooms where power is real, voices rarely need to rise. And on one unforgettable night inside a dimly lit room filled with smoke, pride, and old grudges, a single laugh was enough to stop time itself. A laugh aimed at something sacred. A laugh aimed at tradition. A laugh that crossed an invisible line, and no one there needed to ask what would happen next. Before we go any further, ask yourself this. How would you react if everything you stood for was mocked in front of men who feared you? Would you answer with rage or with calm? If this story speaks to you, leave a comment sharing what respect means in your culture. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and let your voice be part of this conversation. The man who laughed believed tradition was weakness. He was young, loud, and convinced that fear came only from violence. To him, old customs from Sicily were relics, outdated rituals clung to by men who refused to adapt. He laughed openly, confidently, certain that no consequence would dare challenge him in that room. But he misjudged one thing. He misjudged Don Vito Corleone. Vito did not raise his voice. He did not shift in his chair. His face remained still, almost serene, as if the laughter had passed through the air without touching him. Yet everyone else felt it. The subtle change in the room, the tightening of shoulders, the instinctive silence that followed. Because among men of honor, tradition is not nostalgia. It is structure, it is memory, it is law. Sicilian tradition was never about empty gestures. It was about respect for hierarchy, for family, for the unspoken agreements that prevented chaos. When the gangster laughed, he was not mocking a custom. He was declaring himself outside the code. Vito Corleone understood this instantly. He had spent a lifetime learning that the most dangerous men are not those who shout, but those who observe. Power, to him, was never about domination. It was about balance, about knowing when to act and when to wait. And at that moment, waiting spoke louder than any threat. The room watched him closely. Some expected an outburst. Others expected punishment. But Vito offered neither. Instead, he slowly lifted his eyes and looked directly at the man who laughed. That look carried generations. It carried the weight of villages where honor mattered more than life, of families bound not by blood alone but by loyalty, of promises that did not need to be written because breaking them meant exile, or worse. The gangster stopped smiling. He realized too late that laughter had exposed him, not as brave, not as powerful, but as ignorant. Vito finally spoke, his voice low, measured, almost gentle. He did not mention the insult. He did not defend tradition. He did not accuse. He simply spoke about respect, not as a demand but as a natural law, like gravity, like consequence. And in that moment, everyone understood something crucial. Violence was not required. The punishment had already begun. Because when a man like Vito Corleone chooses calm over anger, it is not mercy, it is control. And control in that world is absolute. The gangster shifted in his seat, unsure whether to speak, unsure whether silence was now his only refuge. The air felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were listening. Every man in the room knew that what came next would define more than a single night. It would redefine who belonged, and who did not. And as Don Vito leaned back, folding his hands with deliberate patience, the true cost of that laugh was about to reveal itself. Don Vito's silence stretched longer than comfort allowed. In that pause, the room began to understand that the laugh had not been forgotten. It had been placed exactly where it belonged. The gangster felt it first, a tightening in the chest, the slow realization that attention had shifted, and not in his favor. Vito finally moved, not abruptly, but with the unhurried precision of a man who never wastes energy. He adjusted himself in the chair, the soft fabric creasing under his weight, and continued speaking as if nothing improper had occurred. Yet every word was measured, each syllable landing with intention. He spoke of Sicily, not as a place on a map, but as a way of thinking. He described a land where men learned early that words carried consequences, where laughter could heal or destroy depending on when it was used. His tone remained calm, almost reflective, but beneath it ran something colder, a reminder that tradition was forged through survival, not sentiment. The men listening did not interrupt. Some lowered their eyes. Others stared straight ahead, afraid that movement alone might draw unwanted attention. The gangster sat frozen, suddenly aware that the room was no longer neutral ground. Vito explained that tradition existed to protect men from their own impulses. Without it, Strength turned into chaos, and chaos devoured families. He never once looked directly at the man who laughed, and that omission cut deeper than accusation. To be ignored by Don Vito Corleone was to be stripped of relevance. Around the table, alliances quietly recalibrated themselves. Power does not announce when it shifts. It is felt in instinct, and instinct told them that the young gangster had revealed a dangerous flaw. He lacked restraint. He lacked understanding. And worse, he lacked patience. Vito paused again, this time to sip his drink. The sound was barely audible, yet it echoed. The gangster swallowed hard, realizing that every second without response made him smaller. In that world, impatience was weakness, and weakness invited consequences. At last, Vito turned his gaze toward him. Slowly, deliberately, he asked a simple question, not about the insult, not about respect. He asked the man where he came from, who taught him his trade, who stood behind him when he entered rooms like this. The question was surgical, because lineage mattered, mentors mattered, and the absence of both was now painfully visible. The gangster answered, stumbling slightly over his words. Confidence had drained from his voice. Each sentence exposed how new he was to a world governed, not by noise, but by memory. Vito listened attentively, nodding once, as if confirming what he already knew. Then he spoke again, explaining that men who laughed at tradition often believed themselves free, but freedom without structure led only to isolation. He reminded the room that power without roots could not endure. It burned fast and disappeared. No threats were made, no orders were given, yet the message was unmistakable. From that moment forward, the gangster would be watched, his deals questioned, his alliances weakened. Doors that once opened easily would begin to close. Quietly, politely, permanently. The room felt it collectively. This was how punishment worked under Vito Corleone. Not through spectacle, but through erosion, through time. As the meeting continued, conversations resumed, but something fundamental had changed. The gangster remained seated, silent now, hyper-aware that his presence no longer commanded respect, only tolerance. And tolerance, in that world, was temporary. Vito leaned slightly toward the men closest to him, continuing discussions as if nothing significant had occurred. But beneath the surface, a decision had been made, not impulsively, not emotionally, with the same calm that governed all things under his rule. The laugh had been answered, not yet fully, but inevitably, and the room understood that what followed would not be loud, nor immediate, but far more final. The consequences did not arrive that night, and that was precisely the point. In the days that followed, the gangster told himself that nothing had happened. No threats, no retaliation, no warning. To his inexperienced eyes, silence meant survival. He mistook restraint for weakness, forgetting that under men like Vito Corleone, silence was rarely empty. Calls began to go unanswered. A supplier delayed a delivery without explanation. A meeting was postponed, then quietly canceled. Men who once greeted him with enthusiasm now responded with measured politeness, their eyes cautious, their conversations brief. Nothing hostile, nothing obvious, just distance. Distance, when deliberate, is deadly. The gangster grew restless. He pushed harder, raised his voice, tried to assert dominance where it was slipping. But power, once questioned, cannot be reclaimed by force alone. Each attempt only confirmed what others already sensed. He lacked the patience required to survive in that world. Meanwhile, Vito Corleone observed. From behind closed doors, through trusted intermediaries, he listened. He learned how the young man reacted under pressure, who stayed loyal, who hesitated, who quietly stepped away. Every reaction became information, and information was Vito's most valuable currency. He spoke privately with elders who still remembered Sicily before America, men who understood that tradition was not about ritual, but about restraint. Together, they agreed that mockery of the code was not a personal insult. It was a destabilizing force. And destabilization, left unchecked, spread. Vito did not rush to correct it. Instead, he allowed the system to respond naturally. Respect was withdrawn, not imposed. Opportunities dried up. Invitations stopped coming. The gangster found himself increasingly isolated, surrounded by men who waited for him to speak first. A subtle shift that placed him perpetually on defense. He began to realize the truth too late. In that world, survival depended less on strength than on belonging. and belonging was granted only to those who understood the rules they never needed explained. Vito, meanwhile, continued his routines: family dinners, quiet conversations, moments of reflection. To outsiders, nothing had changed, but beneath the calm surface, balance was being restored. One evening, Vito received word that the gangster had tried to align himself with men outside the established order. Desperate men who did not understand why doors had closed, only that they had. This confirmed what Vito already knew. Arrogance, when wounded, seeks shortcuts, and shortcuts create chaos. Vito considered the implications carefully. Tradition demanded response but not excess, correction not spectacle. He knew that destruction, when unnecessary, weakened the very order it aimed to protect, so he chose precision. A single message was sent through channels that never left paper. Not a threat, an invitation, a request for a private meeting, framed as an opportunity for clarification rather than judgment. The gangster hesitated. Refusing would confirm disloyalty. Accepting meant facing a man whose calm had already undone him without lifting a finger. He accepted. On the night of the meeting, the atmosphere was different. No audience, no laughter, just quiet, intentional space. Vito arrived first, seated already, as if he had always been there. When the gangster entered, he felt the weight immediately. Not fear, realization. He understood now that the power he had mocked was never about dominance. It was about inevitability. Vito gestured for him to sit. The conversation that followed would not involve shouting or threats. It would involve truth. And truth, delivered calmly, has a way of leaving no room to hide. As Vito began to speak, the young man realized that the moment of consequence had finally arrived, not as punishment but as reckoning, and the choice placed before him would determine whether he remained within the order or disappeared from it entirely. Vito's voice remained steady as he spoke, almost conversational, as if the meeting were a courtesy rather than a reckoning. He did not accuse. He did not remind the gangster of the laugh. Instead, he spoke about order, how fragile it was, how easily broken by men who believed themselves untouchable. He explained that tradition was not imposed to limit ambition, but to give it direction. Without it, ambition turned inward, devouring the very men who carried it. His words were neither poetic nor cruel. They were practical, unavoidable. The gangster listened, his posture stiff, hands clasped tightly together. Every instinct urged him to interrupt, to defend himself, to reclaim authority. But something in Vito's presence made interruption feel inappropriate, almost foolish. Vito spoke of loyalty as a form of discipline, not blind obedience but awareness of consequence. He reminded the man that families survived not because they were strong, but because they were consistent, predictable, governed by rules that did not change with mood or ego. At one point, Vito paused and allowed silence to settle. The gangster felt exposed, as if the quiet itself demanded response. He finally spoke, attempting to explain his laughter as misunderstanding, as confidence misplaced, rather than disrespect intended. Vito listened without reaction. When the explanation ended, he nodded once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. He explained that intention mattered less than impact. In their world, perception shaped reality, and reality shaped survival. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to signal gravity. Vito told him that tradition was the language through which men recognized one another. To mock it was to declare oneself illiterate, and illiteracy, in that realm, was dangerous. The gangster felt the weight of every word. For the first time, he understood that power did not come from being noticed, but from being understood, and he had been neither. Vito offered him a choice, not framed as mercy but as structure. Learn the code, respect it, submit not to a man, but to an order larger than both of them, or continue alone, unprotected, exposed to forces far less patient than Vito Corleone. There was no ultimatum spoken aloud. None was needed. The gangster nodded slowly, aware that pride had no place in this moment. Acceptance, not defiance, was his only remaining leverage. Vito observed this carefully, noting the shift. Men could change, he believed, but only when reality left them no alternative. He ended the meeting calmly, standing with deliberate grace. No guards entered, no escort was provided. Trust, even conditional, had been extended, but trust came with memory. As the gangster left the room, he felt smaller, not humiliated but recalibrated. He understood now that the laugh had not been punished through violence, but through education, through removal, through consequence measured in time. Vito remained behind, seated once more. He knew that order had been restored for now, but stability required vigilance. Tradition survived only when enforced without anger and upheld without exception. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the quiet correction that had taken place. Inside, a balance had been preserved, not through fear, but through clarity. And yet Vito knew that the true test had not ended with that conversation. Whether the gangster would endure depended not on promises made in that room, but on actions taken afterward. Because tradition forgives ignorance only once, and the next misstep, however small, would not be met with words. In the months that followed, the gangster never laughed at tradition again, not because fear had silenced him, but because understanding had finally taken its place. He moved differently, spoke less, listened more, and those who watched closely could see the invisible weight now guiding his actions, a weight forged not by violence but by awareness, while Don Vito Corleone continued as he always had, unchanged in posture yet reaffirmed in presence, proving that true power never rushes to correct disrespect. It allows time to teach its lesson, and in that quiet mastery lay the reason his name endured beyond threats, beyond enemies, beyond generations. Because men who rely on force must constantly prove themselves, but men who rely on honor only need to exist. And in a world obsessed with noise, Don Vito's calm remained the loudest truth of all, a reminder that tradition is not the past clinging to power, but the structure that allows power to survive without destroying itself.